Welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, Chief Executive Officer of Langley Esquire, a Tokyo-based public affairs consultancy, and host Maya Matsuoka bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's Sunday morning once again.
Okay.
We have been almost 1 week into the election campaign here in Japan, and there have been a lot of things happening, of course. Some of them are in the news, some of them are not. A lot of campaigning on TV, also out in town. People are using megaphones to catch the attention of the passersby. And obviously, there is 1 more week until the election. So today again, we've got Timothy Langley, Chief Executive Officer of Langley Esquire, which is a Tokyo-based public affairs and government consultancy. Timothy is going to walk us through the events which are going on right now. So Timothy, please go ahead and let's start.
Good morning, Maya, and good morning to everybody here. We typically have about 150 people that come in. Not everybody sticks around. Once I start talking, they usually sign off, but a good portion of those stick around for the entire session, an hour and a half. We used to just kind of let it go freely, and we sometimes went 2 and 3 hours. Remember the one we had about spies in Japan. We're developing a consistent and cohesive group of, policy wonks and Japan hands, and I'm really glad and honored to be a part of that. So I'd like to continue to grow it. And, when we started this room this morning, you said, how are you? And I said, well, I'm still nervous. And I'm nervous because I really want this room to be full of insight and intel that people can use, that it's important to them. It's not a real deep dive, but for those of you who have a smattering, you understand a lot of different things. We don't need to go into a lot of detail, but keeping you up to date every week and hearing your insight and also some of the information that you have individually, like Hayato or Ren or some of the people who contribute, Michael Chuchek, on a regular basis, really makes the dialogue so much richer, and it's just not about me giving a weekly briefing. So I genuinely appreciate that. So getting started, I need to let you know I'm calling live from Osaka. I traveled from Tokyo to Osaka yesterday. Osaka is one of the battlegrounds, a heated battleground, and it's an important area for me because, as you know, I'm working in Japanese politics. I know a lot of people that are running for office. I have a lot of friends who are working in the political realm in Kasumigaseki and also in Nagatacho, not just Diet members, but also their Diet staff. And many of the people who were Hisho at the same time that I was a Hisho, 30 years ago, have gone on to become, members of the parliament. Even Prime Minister Abe was a Diet secretary for his dad. At the same time, I was a secretary for my boss, who became foreign minister in the same political faction. One of the guys who worked in my office, also a Hisho, is now the leader of the Ishin no Kai in Tokyo. So he was a guy that we worked together with very closely as Diet staff for the same Diet member. So Ishin no Kai is slated to win a whole slew of new Diet seats. It has 10 seats now, and it looks like of all of the parties that are involved, they will be proportionally the biggest winner. And no, nobody's going to say, thanks, Tim, for coming to Osaka. I know, I've been there before, but they are slated to be a big winner. And I think that that's going to prove to be true. So what I'd like to do is talk about Kishida, what he's doing right now, where we are with the election cycle, and talk about what are the influences now that are going to lead to an election result 1 week from today. So I can take that a step further and talk about the scenario, the most likely scenarios. I'll talk about 3 of them, but my favorite is the first one. And then I'd like to wrap up with a talk about an issue that people ask me all the time. Nobody pays me any money to do an analysis on it, but it's just of great curiosity. What is the thing about these trucks? What is it with the girls who are singing with a falsetto voice and they have the white gloves on? And what the hell is that? So I'd like to spend a little bit of time on it because it's really interesting if you understand a little bit about Japanese psychology, about the rules and regulations, about how people physically vote, and it's all related to that. And open it up for conversation after that. Okay, so that's the rollout for today. There are 465 seats that are open in the lower house. We all know that. The election started 6 days ago. The campaign will finish in exactly 6 days, and the election will be a week from today. We are halfway through, basically. And a lot of the things that we've learned and that we've heard about from the party leaders. Kishida has been on TV a lot, and the individual leaders of the various political parties, and there are 8 of them, are on TV a lot. They're in a panel discussion and that sort of thing. So we've learned a lot about the policy positions with regard to COVID, the economy, with defense, and that sort of thing. We could separate and kind of dissect those various policy positions, but I think it's less important and less interesting than talking about where we are right now and what is the scenario for an outcome, because not everything is going to be determined just by what their political positions are or what they say on TV. And the reason for that is because I think everybody knows politicians, you can tell when a politician is lying when his lip moves or his lips move. This is a time when they are really desperately attempting to appeal to voters and saying things that resonate within them. Not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to agree with you. There are a broad range of philosophical stances. So the key is, find your team, appeal to them, and appeal to the people who are sitting on the fence. So of all voters who are registered to vote in this country, about 40% are undecided. And of the people who are decided, we kind of have a pretty good analysis of where the various parties sit there. So of those that are decided, the Ldp gets around 36-37% of those people. Komeito gets about 15%, and then the other 6 parties are split out, and then everybody else, the largest majority, are just those that are fence sitters. We talked just a tiny bit about this last week, but as we're approaching the election day, a lot depends on who goes to vote, how many people actually go to vote. So today's a really nice day. We started today's conversation talking about the weather and how nice it is, and how vibrant people are. They're out on the streets. The election trucks are driving by. You can see, and maybe you kind of zone out on it when you hear the guys speaking through the speakers, or when you're going to the station. But the election and the election noise is a part of generating that excitement and that kind of festival-like feeling. So what they're trying to do is build gradually up to a crescendo that will peak on Friday. Saturday, it will be very, very heavy, and hopefully there won't be any gaffes or big issues that they need to, smooth over on Saturday. That's what Saturday will be reserved for. And then, of course, on Saturday, once sunsets, election campaigning must stop, and then we just wait for the schools and the auditoriums to open up for the voting on Sunday morning. And we will know a lot of the course of the elections by around dinner time on Sunday. And then it'll become clear by maybe midnight or so. And then when you wake up in the morning, the analysis will basically be firm. I get this comment all the time from people in the United States where the election campaigns, they're on almost a 2-year rolling basis. The election campaign for the president of the United States usually is a 2-year process. Here, and one of the great things about Japanese politics and why I'm so dedicated to this room and talking with you about how Japanese politics works is because it's very concise and tight and in a very limited window. And in that period of time, you can learn a lot, and you can see with your own eyes how things get decided and how policy is formed. Voting in a Japanese lower house election is in 2 different ways. One is there's a division of votes. About 3/5 of the votes are for single seat districts, and the remaining 2/5 are for proportional representation. And what that means is that when you vote for somebody in a single seat, you write the individual's name. And when you vote for the remaining 2/5, you vote for the party. So there are 8 parties, and you might like what the leader of that particular party said on NHK. And when you're in the voting booth, you might say, well, I don't know who else is in his party that's voting, but I like him, so I'm going to write him. That party, prior to the election, it's already been established, the sheets of names have already been produced and distributed to the population, written in the newspaper. They list in that particular party who is, if I get 7% of the vote in the proportional voting, I'm probably going to get about 10% of the seats. There are 176 seats, so I'll probably get 17 seats, presumably. And the names that I have put on my list, it's kind of like a who's who. I put the most famous people up there, the people that I think will appeal to the voters that check the list, so that these individuals get knocked off. So if I have 15 people there, and 7 represents 10% of the 17 seats, those are the people, they'll go off one by one. And as these names come off, the next name comes up. And it is possible that somebody can run in the single seat district and also have their name on the list. So it could be that you've got a list of 10 names and 3 people are elected because the votes came in on the proportional side, and you move up, and somebody else who has been on the single seat won because of their own name, because of their own the power of their own persuasion. That means that they fall off the proportional list, and somebody else comes up. So it's a little bit complicated. I'm sorry if I lost you there, but it's a pretty distinctive part of the election that we're in now. We have a single seat and we have proportional seats. The single seat is one on the power of that person's voice and smile and kind of his political party, what he does and how long he's been in the parliament. And then the second part is the political party. So let's talk just a little bit about the political party. There are 8 registered political parties, just to list them in a kind of a cascading list of importance or power distribution. You have the Ldp, you have Komeito, which is a smaller party, but it is in coalition with the Ldp, so its weight is enhanced by that. The number one opposition party is the Constitutional Democratic Party. Then you have the Japanese Communist Party, which strikes many people as being strange, since it's a democratic parliamentary system here, and the communists are the second most powerful opposition party. The 5th political party is Ishin. It is a party that was basically formed in Osaka, spread out, and it is gaining force. It's very popular in Osaka, less popular, but establishing a foothold in Tokyo and nationwide. The Democratic People's Party, Reiwa, you've heard probably a lot about Reiwa Shinsen Gumi. And then the last one is the Social Democratic Party. So in terms of numbers, it's like an inverse pyramid. The big kahuna, of course, is the LDP. It has 276 seats, and it just goes really down after that. So they're the big kahuna. They've got a coalition with the Komeito. The Komeito only has about 21 seats in the lower house now. So you've got the Constitutional Democratic Party. It has 110. And the Japanese Communist Party, 12. Ishin, 10. The Democratic People's Party, 7. Reiwa, 1. Social Democratic Party, 1. You see how that really collapses down very quickly. Given that scenario, you would think that with that much power and that much representation, and interpolate from there, since they've been in power for so long and they've controlled many committees and driven the economy and the government for so long, that they're well funded, they have a good war chest, that it would be very difficult to defeat them or to bring them down. Currently, they have, in coalition with the Komeito, they have 2/3 of the seats in the lower house. That's an important number because in order to change the Constitution, you need 2/3 to do that. And in the upper house and the lower house, if a bill is passed and it goes from one house to the other house, but it is defeated in the upper house, it goes back down to the lower house, and the 2/3, the remaining vote by the lower house defeats the upper house opposition, and that bill becomes law. More importantly, with revising the Constitution, you need 2/3 to vote on both houses in order for there to be a referendum. So the goal has always been get 2/3 in the upper house, get 2/3 in the lower house. This election next week is pretty much guaranteed not to preserve this 2/3 majority that the LDP and the Komeito have. And you'll remember that when Mr. Suga was prime minister and he was dancing around between Nikai and Abe and having all of these discussions about how he's going to be able to remain as prime minister, his approval rating was in the high 20s, and the discussion there was that the LDP would lose under his leadership about 70 seats. Currently, so as a result of that, people said we can't have that, so we need to change and go under new leadership. And you'll also remember that in order to get him out and to put Mr. Kishida in, the role of the younger Diet members was significant. Younger Diet members means not so much in terms of age, but in terms of how many terms they've had. So younger Diet members typically means those who have survived 3 elections. And if you've only survived 3 elections, then that means that you've been a Diet member under the Abe administration. So that they call these kind of Abe children. And you probably had an easier time running an election when Mr. Abe was prime minister, because he can support you, he can endorse you if you're in the LDP, and your chances of repeating an election is very high. In a different scenario, under a different leader, that's not always so guaranteed. And so the young vote in this election is really critical. And if you're following the newspaper, there are some analysts that say, the LDP is not going to do that good. The young people are fleeing from the LDP. They're not that interested. On the other hand, you're beginning to see a lot of young people who are interested in what's going on in Japanese politics, asking questions and wondering, what's in it for them, and what is Japan's stance with regard to China, because people know that. In many other instances, people don't know, they don't care, their life is okay, that people are not upset, they don't know what's going on in Afghanistan, they don't care, they don't know what's going on in other parts. Now it's a little bit different, and it is bleeding out to the population at large. So, in particular, defense and foreign affairs are looming very large, and they're becoming topics of just daily conversation. And in that environment, Mr. Kishida has a major advantage. He was the longest serving foreign minister, as you know, under the Abe administration, and then he succeeded into during the Abe administration. And so he has this this background, this platform that he can speak about. You know, people know me. I was the longest serving um, uh, foreign minister. Everybody in the world knows me because I'm such a good guy. So stay with me if foreign policy is an issue with you. And you'll remember that in the cabinet, only two members stayed. There was the defense minister and the foreign minister stayed, which was, I think, a very good signal. It tells you that don't mess with what we have going on right now. It's not the time to fix that. So with regard to foreign affairs, Kishida looks good. He's got the pedigree, he's got the background. And foreign affairs, the new president of the United States, what's going on with the Quad, that sort of thing, is you know a big issue for the general population. So in that regard, Kishida and therefore the LDP looks very good. With regard to defense, which is a huge issue now, and it's appealing as an issue to all voters, there are a couple of things that have happened just recently, just over the last week. So I'm glad we meet weekly, but just over the last week that impact hugely on what party you might want to vote for if you're thinking about it, if you're sitting on the fence. So first of all, you might have heard that, you know, between Hokkaido and Honshu, there's a strait of water. It's called the Tsugaru Strait. It's very narrow, and it's one of the free water transits between the Sea of Japan and the Pacific Ocean. And this week, a flotilla of Russian and Chinese military naval vessels sailed through there on joint exercises. And this hasn't happened in recent memory, that the Russians and the Chinese are together in naval maneuvers together and then sailing through. You know what they're doing with Taiwan and the overflights and the kind of taunting that's going on there. This is another, it looks very similar to that, and it doesn't escape people's attention. This is a huge deal. The other thing that happened is that North Korea launched a ballistic missile, this time from a submarine. So if you didn't know that North Korea had submarines, they've always had submarines, not very good ones, usually diesel and loud, but they're getting better. It's frightening that they have launch capabilities there. And so this is a huge deal. And it's interesting that they decided to do it during the election campaign. Maybe it's serendipity, but I think you know, these kinds of decisions are made taking all of these points into consideration, especially by a regime like North Korea. So you have to think about, you know, what Japan is going to do in regards to that. The other thing that happened just, well, it hasn't really quite happened, but the appointment as a candidate for ambassador to Japan is beginning to pick up speed. Rahm Emanuel, a good friend of Barack Obama, and the appointee, he's not appointed yet, he's the candidate for ambassador to Japan. So that is picking up steam, and there are no other contenders there, with Mr. Biden and the Democrats controlling both houses. He needs Senate approval to become ambassador, so it looks almost guaranteed that he will come into Japan. This is a pretty big deal. He's already started to posture what his position will be with regard to Japan, and he's stated that he will be firm on China. He will make another couple of policy statements as soon as his nomination is confirmed. So that's pretty important too, that the United States will be more engaged. Mr. Biden just said the other day when pressed that the United States would come to the defense of Taiwan. So this is kind of a new statement that just came out. And then finally, I don't know if you've heard about this. The Chinese launched a missile in low Earth orbit, a missile without a warhead, but it was basically a missile with warhead capabilities. This missile flew all the way around the world once, and then came back to hit its target. This is the first time this has been done in human history, that a country has been able or been capable of flying a missile around the world, circumventing the entire world, and coming back to hit its target. That happened, and apparently, from what I've heard, the American intelligence community was shocked and amazed that they could do that, and also somewhat pissed off that the Chinese did it without telling anybody. Sailing that around, that's pretty bold. So, in light of that, defense and foreign policy are going to loom quite large, and you'll hear more and more about that. The other parties, the parties that are in opposition, don't have much to say about it because they haven't been in power. They don't have, probably their best bet on challenging the LDP there is to say, we have a peace constitution, and defense spending should stay where it is or lower, and we should reject, doing the bidding of the American armed forces, and just, survive under the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. I think in the coming days, you'll hear a little bit more of a crystallization of their positions on that. But very definitely, the LDP is going forward with the defense spending of Japan is typically capped at 1%. Let's kick it into 2%, and that's gaining wide support, and it's being talked about quite a bit. So going from 1% to 2% is very, very huge. With regard to scenarios, so what does it look like coming out next week? It looks like, to me, the LDP will lose a number of seats, but it won't lose, it certainly won't lose the majority that it has in coalition with the Komeito, but I think it will probably be able to maintain by itself a majority, which is, 233 seats. So that means even if it loses 40 seats, they were terrified that under Suga they would lose 70. Some predictions say it could be 40 seats, but even with 40, I guess we're still okay. And if it is, if the election finishes and the LDP in coalition with Komeito retains a majority in the lower house, you can bet your bottom dollar that Kishida will say, this is a mandate, and now we're moving forward on the economy, we're moving forward on COVID, we're moving forward with, the distribution of wealth and taking it from all of those people who generated it during the Abe years and under Abenomics, and redistribute it to the people who really deserve it. Those kind of policy positions that he's already been talking about. It could cause a little bit of a tumble with, going too far forward. The third scenario, less likely than the first two, is that the LDP loses pretty heavily. It loses by itself a majority, and it would retain that in coalition with the Komeito, but since it's a little bit on the ropes, it would probably invite in other coalition partners, and the two that are somewhat similar to the LDP would be Ishin and the Democratic People's Party. So Ishin is important because their policies are not that diametrically opposed to what the LDP is. It's just that they've been out of power. They want to be in power. They've only got 10 seats now. They cannot even, sponsor a bill by themselves from the floor. They need to have another coalition, or they need to have some independent members of the parliament to support them, because you need 20 to establish some sort of prominence to get your bills put into the process. They can't even do that, and neither can the Democratic People's Party, which has 7 seats. So likely, in order to shore up their popularity and their positions of power, they could come in on a coalition. I see that as less likely. And then as unlikely is that it loses and a coalition of the opposition comes together to take over power, as happened after the Aso administration about 15 years ago. That looks very unlikely. They would have to gain between presumably the Constitutional Democratic Party and the Communist Party, which are opposed on a lot of different issues. Together, they'd have to get 111 more seats than they have right now. So that looks really, really iffy and unlikely. And even if it was a scenario that came up, it would be so shaky as to be not a long tenured administration, in my view. So I've breezed over a lot of things. We can get into those in the Q&A if there's interest and appetite, or if you've identified to me those areas that I just didn't touch on and we should. But I'd like to begin to wrap it up by talking about the election trucks. It's a little bit more lighthearted portion of this briefing, but I think it's something that people are interested in and not many people know. So as you know, I worked in Japanese politics about 30 years ago. And one of the things that I did a lot of, because I was kind of the monkey on the string, because I was the only foreigner in the parliament. And the political faction that my member was in was the largest political faction, the Hosoda faction. It's still the largest political faction. And in order to appeal to a certain segment, or at least just add a spice of this candidate, he's international. Didn't you know that? He's got an international flair. He's probably fluent in English. So they would truck me out to many of these campaigns that were people that were in that political faction. So I attended a lot of political rallies. I rode a lot of these election trucks. I put on the gloves and I held the microphone and sat around lots of girls who are called uguisujo, nightingales, who are hired for their good looks and the sing-song voice that they have, and their virility to be able to do that for 8 hours. So I did that all over the country. So there are a couple of stipulations about the sound trucks, about the volume, about the numbers, and about how they're used. So I want to just touch on that because it's an interesting part about Japanese psychology. So first of all, any candidate is only limited to one truck. So you can't have 2 trucks go in at the same time. If you do that, that's a violation, and you'll lose your election. Definitely, you could be arrested. So you can only have 1 truck. And while you are moving, you can't campaign. You can't have a campaign speech. The only time you can use the truck for a campaign speech is when it is parked. And many of these trucks are fastened with a rooftop where you can climb on a ladder and get up there. Not all of them are like that. Those are kind of the super duper ones. But a lot of times you'll get the campaign van. You might put a couple of loudspeakers on it. You might not if it's your first time running and you don't have support of a political party yet, or if maybe the political parties don't want you to run and you've got to do it on your own shoestring. So when you're looking at the trucks, you can kind of look at that and you can see, how much real effort they're putting into the campaign vehicles. But the reason why you only can say certain things while the truck is moving is because they're trying to make it an even race, so that if you have a truck and your candidate or your opposition doesn't have a truck, you don't want to give him too much of an unfair advantage. So if you have a truck, don't campaign. The only thing that you can say is, hi, this is, Nakayama Taro. How are you? It's, my name is Nakayama Taro. And that's all they can do. So that's why you just hear the same thing over and over again, because that's all they can say. They can't say much more. And the other reason why they say that is because when you go into the voting booth, and it used to be that you must write the kanji of that candidate that you're voting for. And if your stroke count is wrong, that vote is invalid. So they've changed that now. You don't need to write in kanji, but you do need to write the candidate's full name. And sometimes there are people that have the candidates who might have the same first and last name. So you've got to distinguish it there. But the point here is that you, as a candidate, you must embed your name into the voting public. And they've done studies here that say that hearing the candidate's name over and over again, even though it's irritating, does not enhance your appreciation of the candidate, but it does have an impact when you close the curtains and you're getting ready to write the name, that subliminally it comes up then. So now you understand why it's important. Hi, my name is Langley, Timothy Langley. Don't, please vote for me. I'm your guy. Because if you've heard that maybe 16 times over the last 4 days, it does have an impact on your memory and on just the rote way that you do your life. So that's an interesting aspect of the campaign trucks. People have gotten into trouble in many areas of running a campaign truck, and one of them is in decibel levels. So they don't have a rule on decibel levels. You might already know that, and you're probably scratching your head and wondering why in the hell not, going through school districts, and a lot of people are working from home, and this is just a total imposition. The government understands that it is an imposition, and they've said that's the cost of democracy. We have to do that. There's not much else that we can do. So the decibel levels are basically left to the individuals. And the rule here is, if you're making people angry, if we get complaints, we'll let you know. And you could suffer as a consequence of that by being just too boisterous. But there's no rule or law against that. So there's a protocol that everybody has when you go through a hospital zone or a school zone. You're supposed to tone it down, or maybe even just turn it off as you go through there. Some people will violate that. And the other reason is that for actually most campaign districts in Japan, they include rural areas. So a lot of the people who are voters are out in the fields working, and as they drive by the irrigation ditches and the roads that go through the mountains, they're blaring out the same message so that people can hear that. And in that case, they crank it up. But inside the city, they're supposed to use their own discretion in keeping that down. And the funny thing is, and I've been in this on many instances, and people get really worked up about it, is that you're driving down the road and you can hear the other truck coming the opposite direction towards you, and you have this battle. You crank up the volume, and you put your best speaker there, and everybody is like a bunch of chickens waving their wings with the white gloves on. And as they approach, they get louder and more agitated, and it's so funny. It's a real competition about getting your name out there. And you would think maybe decorum is, to be cooler might be better. No, they will not give up on that. That is actually a fight to be had. So I think it's an interesting part of how elections are run here. Not everybody can afford a truck, but if you can, you sure want to squeeze out as much as you can from that expense. And just in closing, I'm in Osaka once again to contribute, not to too much participate. I'm a foreigner. I don't have the right to vote, but I have lots of people that I'm very close to, that I support, that um, um, are just, people that I've known for many, many years. So visiting their campaign offices, going to their speeches is an important sign of respect and support. It doesn't mean that I'm bringing an envelope of money or that I bought a case of Coke and delivered it to their election office, which I've done many, many times before as a political aide. But showing up and being there and having that kind of support for the candidate is a big deal, because it's like the second guy that stands up to dance. It does generate this kind of festive uh, feeling. And as we talked last week, Michael Chuchek was in the room. I don't know if he's in the room today, but we were talking about the festival spirit of an election campaign. And for many that are involved, it is a festival. And for many that are involved, it is a battle. It is a battle for your job, for being able to, you gave up your job so that you could run for as a candidate, or you're just on the teetering edge. You were a member, and then they closed down the house and you don't know if you're going to win. It is a battle for your life. So you're going to fight really hard. But the overall aura is a festive spirit, and make people feel good and make them feel happy and give them hope for the future, and lean on them for their civic responsibility to go in and vote. And most Japanese have that. More than 50% of the entire Japanese population does vote. It's a very high percentage. But getting that up into the higher numbers is every candidate's hope and dream. So there's a lot of other things that we could go into that I could have talked about. I've gone on and on for almost 40 minutes now, so I apologize for hogging all the air, but I would like to open it up and explore some of the other issues that the audience might have. Maya, thank you very much.
Thank you, Timothy. I have a question to you. You gave us the scenarios, the 4 possible scenarios of the outcome of the elections. And so I have seen online, that some observers, of course, those observers are based mostly out of Japan, but some observers expect surprises. So surprises as big as, the opposition winning the elections and the LDP losing the majority. They say that it may happen because the opposition, so we've got that's the Constitutional Democratic Party and the Japan Communist Party as, the largest opposition coalition anyway. So that those observers believe that because of let's say, the policies of those two parties are so very far away from one another, even if they win, they will not be able to actually manage the
Govern.
country. Yes, to govern well. But what is your view on this?
So in Japanese politics, like in Japanese business, in many cases, the decision is already made before you sit down to have the meeting, right?
Right.
And similarly, in Japanese politics and in elections, a lot of the decisions have been made even before we sit down and write the vote. So there's a lot of analysis that goes on. There's a lot of consumer surveys that are done. Hayato is on the call. Hayato and I have been sharing these kinds of analysis. They come out of a lot of different places. They come out of the LDP. Who's safe? Who's not safe? How are we going to shore up this individual so that we get one more seat? And even one seat just makes such a difference in the party politics and also in factional politics. So it is, to me, it is, we have one more week to go and a lot can happen, but it is inconceivable to me that the opposition party would gain 111 seats and the LDP would lose so many seats. They would lose far more than 70 in order for that to occur. The opposition party needs to gain 111, and of the 111, 70 of those would come from the LDP. Where are the rest of these going to come? They would have to have like Cinderella on a dream team with maybe, I don't know, George Clooney, to be able to pull something like that off. Somebody that was really attractive, that appealed to the entire nation, because it's not just, the pretty face, it's also the proportional representation too. So you can tell when they do these popularity polls, they only focus on the proportional because that's the easier way to kind of guide sentiment. Because when you go to the single seat districts, a lot of it is depending on individual personalities and how they look and what their smile is and what their pedigree is and who their father was. When it's on the proportional side, it is basically on the policies and the politics and their legacy. So when they do those polls on who do you think is going to come up with the most votes, they almost always focus on the proportional side of that. So I hope that addresses the issue. I think LDP, it's with many things, we had the same thing with the election of Kishida. Everybody, the foreigners and the foreign observers were all pulling for Konotaro because he's a known quantity. Even though Kishida was the foreign minister, people know Konotaro. He was very prominent. He's a great English speaker. He's, his father was, Speaker of the House. And they want, what you want and what the analysis tells you are two different things. And I think people are guided by that. I would like it to be like this. I'd love the LDP to get shaken up. I'd love to see them get their butts kicked. And it just never happens. So the better thing to do is just look at the numbers and kind of follow what the pattern of recent history has told you about it. And that's a better guide, in my view.
Thank you. And it's interesting because, as you said, a lot of people want to LDP to be shaken and probably lose that majority, the majority they have at the moment. But at the same time, when we look at the political scenery here in the country, there isn't really a strong opposition, not just a party, but even a coalition that can stand up to the LDP and Komeito as well.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because in the polls, 38% of the people said they would like to see change. I'm sorry, this is 38% of the people who are undecided.
Oh, okay.
So of the undecided, that represents about 40% of all voters, or the polled voters.
Right.
And of this 40%, about 30% of those, 35% of those said, I would like to see change. I don't want to see the same thing after Abe and Suga. I would like to see something different. And I think Kishida does kind of represent that. It's far more different than even Obama and Biden, right? The Obama administration and the Biden administration, there's a lot of mirror imaging that's going on there. And in Abe, Suga, Kishida, there's less of that. So if you want change, it does represent a little bit of change. He's a different kind of personality. Similarly, there's about 29% who said they don't want change. They would like to see the status quo without saying, I want the LDP. They've just said that sentiment is a key factor in their decision making.
Yes, that's interesting. So when you mentioned the change, how change is perceived here and in, let's say, in the United States,
right?
Kishida is a very good cultural fit when you think about it, because
absolutely, yeah.
Yes. So in Japan, this is a country where incremental change is valued so much more than, let's say, sudden change. Konotaro was not really set to win this time.
Yeah, he did represent something of. I think it was played up a little bit too much, but providing a revolution in how we're going to do things, and rejecting nuclear power and shaking things up. He's a maverick, right?
Yes.
And so that didn't resonate very well, unfortunately. But also, even more so now, with the four things that I talked about, with the Tsugaru Straits, with North Korea, with the Chinese missile that flew around the world amazingly. Happening just this last week, the dynamics have changed. And as you might not know, typically it's a generalization, but the Japanese population is very risk averse. When given different scenarios, different choices, they almost always choose the one that involves the least amount of change or upset or derision, even if it means that it could get to be a more difficult situation. Let's deal with that later, but let's not accept too much change. I was just teasing you, by the way.
Right, and very much appreciated, by the way. Yeah, but it's interesting because I'm just thinking about, the defense budget and how it is going to be increased because that's the way, well, the region is moving in. It's not just Japan, it's all the countries in the region. And just Stephen Nagy, he mentioned last week on Monday that the region is militarizing. So there is no country left behind, and Japan will follow, of course. But, and just yesterday I was talking with my mother in law, and to your point, that people here don't really like change. My mother in law was saying, well, I don't see why they need to increase the defense budget. I want the things to stay the same. We are happy the way we are. So the perception, and that's the fear which people have, of that increase in the budget. It's perceived like Japan is getting ready to go to war, and
Yeah,
it's probably different, of course. So that's not the real intention behind the increase, but the population's perception is really different from what is going on, I believe.
yeah. I have great admiration for the Chinese, for Chinese foreign policy. They really are very good at this, and their incursions into Taiwanese airspace in a kind of taunting, aggressive move, and the move through the Tsugaru Straits. I think this tactic is a very thoughtful and designed tactic to get people to kowtow, actually. So I think, in an environment like this, mistakes can be made, and based on mistakes or maybe false flags, triggers are set. And I think should that happen, history will show, that was all set up by design. That was, that's the aggressive stance of China, which triggered that. But I think the Japanese in particular are very susceptible to that. I can't respond too much about what's going on with Taiwan, but they're a hell of a lot closer and have a whole lot more to lose. But with regard to the Japanese, there is a beauty and a attractiveness to the Constitution, the Japanese Constitution, the war renouncing part of it. It's unique in that respect. It's also unique that of all modern countries, for 70 years, the Constitution has not been touched, not a bit, has not been revised at all. So yes, it could do with a little bit of dusting off. But I think that the Japanese population is being pincered into that kind of a decision, and I think people will vote, and then the people who are in power will say, I have a mandate to do that because I did say at one point in time in my campaign speech that I wanted to go from 1% to 2%. So since now you guys voted for me, I take that as an endorsement. So this march towards a 2% and going from 1% to 2% is huge. I mean, Japan's military, even though it's defense specific, it is not supposed to have offensive capabilities. It's one of the largest in the world. No comparison to the United States or China or even Israel, but it is huge. So I think that decision will be inevitable given the geopolitics that are going on now. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Timothy. Hi, Maya. Thank you again for a great room. I always look forward to it, and I always learn so much. I have two questions, one pretty specific and another one that's more general. So I'll ask my more specific question first. Timothy, you mentioned that the joint naval exercise with Russia and China through the Tsugaru Straits, as well as the missile launch from the North Korean submarine, that they could have been specifically timed with the election. Um, and so could you explain that? Because I actually feel like it seems like that would actually work against them because the people might want to elect politicians who would take a more hardline stance against China. So I was wondering if you could just answer that first.
Yeah, you would think so. That's the conclusion you might initially reach. And the reason why I said, I admire the Chinese for their foreign policy is because, I know how much effort and energy and their foreign policy apparatus. It's really something. And so they don't do anything that's not calculated to generate a result that they want. So the timing, and having a flotilla go through and doing the joint exercises with the Russian naval forces, that's a big deal, and it takes a lot of months of planning. But that was by design. You can't just leave that to chance. The ballistic missile that was fired by the North Koreans, you could say that they're just rushing as quickly as possible, and if they can do a test, let's just do it as quickly as we can. But at the same time, they haven't done this. They haven't fired a missile for almost 2 years. It's been very quiet. So this particular timing is curious, if not actually by design. So all I can do is speculate on that. I don't have any inside knowledge, but it does come at a very interesting time that even this round the world missile by the Chinese, that is really really something. That's like having aliens land on your front lawn. They were able to pull that off. We didn't know anything about it. We only heard about it after they announced it. And probably some of the satellites picked it up as it was zooming around, and it was zooming around. These kinds of missiles, by the way, they don't go into outer Earth orbit. They stay inside the envelope of the atmosphere. So they're flying at low Earth orbit, and that means they are screamingly fast and difficult to, of course, shoot down. But you can pick them up. So I'm sure it just scared the bejesus out of those guys who are sitting under those mountains in Colorado, watching the entire world's air traffic. What was the question? The
Yeah.
second part?
Oh, well, just to follow up on the first part of the question, I agree. It is kind of, this timing is suspicious. I'm hoping maybe Hayato has some insight on it. I feel like he always has good insight into this kind of stuff. Um, and the second question I had was, it's regarding the LDP. I'm having a hard time figuring out what the LDP stands for, who they stand for, or what their ideology is, especially when I look at the candidates, the most recent candidates,
Outrageous.
comparing, yeah, like if I'm just comparing Konotaro with Takaichi, I mean, they seem diametrically opposed almost. It's baffling to me that they're in the same party. And as you were going through the list of opposition parties just now, I was looking on Wikipedia, just to kind of find out what their stances are. And all of them are pretty clear. But then when I go to the LDP Wikipedia page, under ideology, it specifically says there is no unified ideology. It is like a catch-all party for everyone. And I just don't understand, is this intentional, or do they intentionally not have specific stances?
Thank you. So when I said outrageous, I wasn't directing that at the LDP. I was directing that at you for having the timidity of observing the LDP doesn't really stand for anything. the reason why the LDP was formed, boy, we can get into this. Maybe Maya, it's good for another discussion. But the LDP was cobbled together to take power and to establish long-term power for a very fragile political situation where the communists were they had a very strong voice in how post-war Japan was going to develop. It was very fractured, and there was the liberals, there was the Democrats, and so what they did is they merged those, and they had the Liberal Democratic Party, and it's kind of not even liberal, and it's not even kind of democratic, and it's not it's more right wing, but I think you can define it as it's big business. It represents big business because that's where the money is. And it's about defense policy. It's about the honoring of those people who died for the country in the war, and the position of the emperor. I think that's the LDP. Pretty much, you can say that about it. But we could get into this on a separate room and just talk about the LDP and their foundations, and how the agency that shares my last name was so involved and remains involved in supporting that structure, because the most important thing geopolitically, and maybe even for the Japanese, is let's have stability. We would like to have a kind of a two-party system where the opposition and the administration in power is somewhat balanced. We don't want more of a kind of a dictatorship, which we've had in some administrations, where rules and laws are passed, and the control of press and the NHK has been dominated. So we kind of don't want that. But it is a big circus tent. So you're going to have difficulty because, and that's the other reason. I'm sorry, I'm going on so long, but that's the other reason why, in order to understand the LDP, you have to understand the various factions within the LDP. So the LDP cannot survive without the factions. The factions support the LDP, and so we've just gone through that little exercise there, that the factions, who's going to be the prime minister, and how many cabinet seats do I get, and after that, how many party posts. And we just saw that. We saw that revealed to us. So sorry for going on so long. I hope that responds somewhat, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. It does. Yeah, as an American, this concept of having a catch-all party is just very, it's difficult for me to grasp, but I'm sort of starting to get it. So I appreciate all your insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Hayato in the house.
Oh, hi. So I'd like to just add to your feedback to Jennifer, that my understanding is whenever there's a kind of a security concern, like a missile from North Korea, or this kind of military exercise, the LDP, in particular, those guys who are considered to be more kind of conservative or right wing, do better, like led by Abe. So because of the political the momentum for the Abe and those guys may not be the best right at this time. So maybe the history or the record or information that I got from the Prime Minister's office is whenever there's a rating on the support the Abe and those guys are low, and they always get the missiles from North Korea and the rating goes up. So it's very, my sense I
That's
got
curious.
was, they are very closely coordinated. And also North Korea, in a view from the Japanese government or the leaders, is that they're not the enemy, but they are kind of a friend, because the mother of the leader is from Japanese, from Osaka, right? Yeah, so there's a kind of close coordination as to how whenever the rating in those conservative or right wing, more kind of aggressive a party goes down, there's always a missiles flying in from North Korea. Sometimes.
Yeah, it is curious that North Korea, even though there are reports that people are starving, they have, ballistic missiles, that they have submarines, that they have all this weaponry, and you just wonder, what are they selling? How are they generating so much revenue that they can support that? Or maybe it's just on the backs of their people that people are eating grass and they're buying bullets, which that's an unproductive use of resources, because you can build your military, but that doesn't mean you're using it or that it's producing anything of great value, where you could be producing plowshares and tools and dedicating your economy that way. So it is really curious what's going on there, what the final gambit is, and there's a lot of analysis on what their true game is.
Yes, and the information I was told by the Prime Minister's office is 2 years ago, when the two missiles flew in from North Korea, they are shot by the submarine, Israeli submarine from North Korean water. And the one was kind of flew over the island, and one accidentally landed in Hokkaido island. Then when there's a YouTube picture or video on this fire in Hokkaido, they have been mysteriously erased.
How about that?
So there's something going on, very interesting behind.
Thank you for that. Tom Logan, how are you? Welcome to the floor.
Good morning. Very interesting discussion this morning, very timely. And, actually, I appreciate the observations you had about the sound trucks and some other elements. It just goes to show you can live in Japan for a very long time and not really know some of these things. And so that took down my anger level a little bit now that I realized why are they going around saying the same thing over and over? So thank goodness that you brought that blood pressure down a little bit. And so the second thing is just a general.
Sorry, Tom, just to interrupt right there. So it used to be that you had to write the kanji, right?
Yes.
And so even in the soundtrack, you might hear them saying "ito hen no," right? They might even dissect the kanji characters so that these farmers and everybody knew exactly. That's how you write the character. Don't forget "ito hen," right?
There's always some explanation, and some of these I have to confess, completely escaped me for all these years. So, it pays to tune in to your and Maya's.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, and so here's the thing, I was by the train station in Asagaya here in Tokyo several days ago, and one of the candidates, who is from a rather famous family here in Tokyo, one was a member of the Diet and became governor of Tokyo, and this is his son, who was on a soapbox. Very well preserved. I mean, thick pancake makeup, the white gloves, impeccable dark blue suit, the white sash with his name across it, and it was greeting everyone as they were heading for the trains. And as is usually the case, I understand people are in a hurry to get to where they have to go, but you see very little, if any, interchange between a candidate and the populace. You just don't see people stop and say, well, what's the story on that particular bill, or what are we going to do with respect to that? I see very little of that, and I believe it's probably a cultural explanation,
Yeah.
maybe insight why you don't see any kind of interchange between the electorate and them. However, there are exceptions to the rule, and about that same train station about 3 years ago for another election, there was a Minshito party member, and I walked over and talked to her, and actually she spoke English because she had studied in the U.S. So right away, there was a very good connection. And I said, how about for longtime foreign residents in Japan who A, have permanent resident status, and B, are actual taxpayers and have paid all level of taxes, including inheritance taxes here, that they be granted maybe a half of a vote, either in local elections or municipal elections. And actually she was warm to the idea. It was very amazing, and we actually had a good intelligent interchange for about 5 minutes on it, kind of going back and forth in Japanese and English. And I realized I was holding her up from her hand waving with the white gloves. So there are exceptions to it, but Tim or Maya, do you or anybody else have any insight on that cultural aspect? That's all.
Thanks, Tom. Great question, and I've got a couple of things to share with you. So if you're running as a candidate in the LDP, there are training sessions that the LDP runs. And with regard to your particular conversation with the English-speaking female candidate, one of the things that they teach you is no matter what a candidate, whatever a voter or potential voter might say, don't laugh.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So, yes. So even though we pay, the taxes and stuff like that, how about giving us a little bit of sunshine on potentially voting? Don't laugh. Even as ridiculous as what these guys might say, don't laugh. Just be so. In the wider context, the most frequently said word or phrase of candidates during the election cycle is domo domo or yoroshiku onegaishimasu, right? You're absolutely right. It's they don't even touch the flesh now. I mean, I can not imagine how difficult it is to campaign now. So there are different supporters groups. So, for example, the Barbers Association, the Association of barbers, or maybe the Beer Association. So when you pick a station to give a stump speech at, you'll want to make sure that there's somebody that you can visit that has a coalition that supports you, that already supports you. And what you want to do is to create an event. You want to create something, quote unquote, spontaneous. And in the absence of that, create spontaneous stuff too, like some girl just presenting you with a bouquet of flowers. Wow, isn't that interesting? Yes, let's clap at that. So there's a lot. Just can we get people just to take a picture of us, or maybe do something so that the television camera takes a picture or reports it. They're familiar to us. We know that they're here on site. So let's, kiss a baby or something. They don't kiss babies, but, that's why when I was doing the campaigning, it was kind of neat and cool, because it was like monkey on the stick. And they had that monkey on the stick. And gosh, he even talks, right? And this is amazing to people, that there are a couple of stump speeches, and then you get this foreigner up there with the mustache and the microphone and the armband, and he's talking. Oh my gosh, people listen, So you're looking for those kinds of things as a candidate, and if you can't get them, then you try and artificially generate them, because so much is dependent on just, I don't know, just, it's not even atmospherics, but it's just, creating these scenes that people reflect on and remember, and they go, wasn't that funny? And, oh, I remember him, so that's why I'm going to write his name. Election campaigning, it is, at the psychological level, it is just really, really important. And I know who you're talking about, Mr. Ishihara, who is, he's one of those candidates that is,
Correct.
People love to hate him because he's so arrogant and he's so aloof, and he comes from so much money, and he has a lot of political power because of his father and because of his pedigree. But yeah, he's like your consummate politician. I have this power, and you people, I'll dying to acknowledge you, right? He's got that kind of vibe.
I have not seen I've seen him on the trucks, of course, but and I understand that, so you can be up high to be seen by as many people as possible. But it was very indicative of that, in standing on that soapbox, and one could really sense the disconnection, the lack of connection between his voting, populace there going around about their business, and he himself. It was actually
But he's safe. He's safe.
He's very
Yeah.
safe in that, I think.
As a candidate, he's safe. He has a political faction, so people might not like him, and therefore decide not to vote for the LDP on the representational part. So you do have people that are from the party that go to these campaigns, they analyze it, and then they report back, and then maybe he's called on the mat. You should, use a little bit more kinder words, or you should kiss a baby, or you should do something rather than being so aloof. So they get coached as this goes on, because it does have an impact on the LDP in the proportional voting as well. But your observations are probably shared by maybe 70% of the people who are in the audience. Oh, there's Ishihara. I remember him. I remember his dad, and gosh, his uncle was so cool, wasn't? Yeah. So they have these memories and these reflections. But disappointment of voters is reflected in how they vote, obviously. So they try and diminish that as much as possible. A lot of psychology going on there. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. I got the message. Timothy, thank you very much for the session.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Tom, Hayato, Jennifer, Frank. Thank you.
This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you.